Hi everyone and welcome back. In previous set of JavaScript videos, I covered the basic concepts about JavaScript like object, function prototype, object proto, object shallow copy, deep copy, all different aspects about JavaScript like we talked about async-await, callback, promises and all. Now in couple of more videos like 2 to 3 videos, I will be talking about some common set of questions which you might face while giving some interviews, while talking just randomly about JavaScript. So you should be aware about all those different aspects in JavaScript. Okay, so we'll talk about these things one by one. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the constructor function and this new keyword using which we are creating the object of a function, right? So what all different things this new keyword does to the function. So we created an employee function and now we are doing new employee. So what this new employee is doing, right? So this is a 4-step process actually. So first of all, it creates a new object, empty new object. Okay, then assign that empty object to this value. Okay, that is the second thing. Then that function, this particular function will inherit the prototype from the function, and then if there is no explicit return, then it will just return this object. Okay, the newly created object which we have created. So the new employee, right, this is also called as a constructor function using which we can create an object of a function. I mean, we have already inspected this and we have checked this, the prototype. So emp is an object, so proto of emp is pointing to the prototype of a function from which it has been created, which is employee is the function. Okay, similarly there are other aspects we are going to talk about is let's talk about simple null and undefined. Interesting one. So null and undefined. Okay, what do you get when you do a type of null? Always remember that it is going to be object. Null is considered in JavaScript as an object, and undefined type of undefined is always undefined. Similarly, when you do type of array, what do you think? It is also an object. All the array are nothing but an object where key is the index of an array and value is the index value. So if you just talk about const x, this is also an object. What it is having, it is nothing but having a key value pair, like at the 0th index I have the value 1 and at first index I have the value 2, something like this, right? So when you do the type of x, it will also come as an object. So we have other primitives also like boolean, number, string, undefined, object, symbol and all. Okay, now next thing we can talk about is sometimes in the interview they will ask you to write a memorized function. Okay, from there they will test your concepts about closure, concepts about curry functions and all. So if we just try to talk about simple memorized function, we can write it. So function memorized and it is taking function as an argument. Okay, let me just call this a little bit. So memorized function, what it is doing is it is taking function as an argument and it is going to return another function. So it will have a const cache. So memorized function is if you are calling a same function with same argument, then it should give you the value from the cache. Okay, what it is returning another function and it is having params. So you will understand also the concepts of closure because function is returning another function here. So here we will check if this cache has that params already there, then return it. Otherwise what we need to do is we need to first calculate the result from the function. We need to get the result of this function by passing the params. Okay, I got the result. I will set it in the cache. Okay, and I can return the result. This is how it works, right? Now, how you can call this, because this function is again calling returning another function, right? So we can actually memorize this function which is 2 upper. This is a function and what this function is doing, it is taking string as an empty string as input with a default constructor, default argument, and it is using this to uppercase native function of JavaScript, right? This function we are going to memorize. So const to upper memorized function. We will call this function and we'll pass it. To upper, right? We got something. To upper is again a function because this function, memorized function, is returning another function. So we can call it again by passing the parameters. So ABC, right? It will return in ABC, right? Now you can, if you are passing the same argument, then it will get it from cache. It will not evaluate it again, right? So this function is returning another function. This is same as if you have seen this kind of example, const add, which is accepting argument A and it is returning another function which is taking function B as an argument, and it is returning A plus B, a simple closure example, right? And how you will call it? You will call it twice, or you will assign it to some variable and then call it again, right? Similarly here, this function is returning another function. So memorized we got this to upper memorized function, and then we are calling it. So here we are passing function and here we are passing the argument. So once you are calling it for the first time, this function is stored inside the closure of the inner function. That's why you are able to call it. Otherwise function would have been undefined, right? But the function, which is a argument passed in the outer function, is stored inside the closure of the inner function. Okay, from this lot of concepts are getting reflected when you talk about it. Now next thing we can talk about is different ways of invoking a function or declaring a function. You might have seen these kind of examples, like function, you can simply create function hello, right? And then you can also assign it to some expression, const x equal to function. You can use arrow function also, which is pretty much simple, right? And it is just, you just pass the same value and same value are returning, right? So now another thing which we'll talk about is invoke the context of this in the functions while calling it in the different approaches, right? Invocation as a function. So simply if you just try to put a function something like this, and here you are doing console.log, what do you think, what is the value of this here when you are calling this hello? It is going to point to the window object, right? And even if you just change this function to something different, const object, okay, here I have a const object and here I have some method. Any kind of callback. Okay, and now you are calling this method o.method. This is a callback function. So we are writing it something like this. And here if you put console.log this is also pointing to window object. So how we can override the definition of this object inside a function, that we will take a look into this example. Okay, so there are many ways of writing a function or calling a function, using function as an expression, or function can return another function, function can take function as an argument, right? That is a callback function. Now if we just talk about a simple example where we try to override the function definition using object, like we have a const details. Here you can see I have a property name. Okay, here I have a get name function. Function can be written simply like this, and here if I do console.log this, simply this, and if you just try to do console.log this dot name, so what value we are going to get when I'm trying to do details dot get name? Here this will point to this current object. Okay, details dot get name you are calling. So whatever you are trying to print, this will point to this object. Okay, so here this dot get name, details dot get name. In this function definition, this will point to this object, right? So here it is not pointing the window object which we were seeing earlier in the simple function example. Now we are also invoking function as a expression, like using new constructor that we have already seen. Like if you are executing a function, you have written a simple employee function, okay, simple employee function, and what it is doing is, if you just see this in this and you are trying to create an object of this function, then how this object behaves, right? It is creating the empty object, then assigning the empty object to this keyword, and this will become an empty object. So this is how we are overriding this context. Earlier it was pointing to the window object, but you are creating the new employee function, then it is creating the new empty object, and it will assign that empty object to this context. So this dot name and all these values will be assigned, right? And then this object will be returned from this function, right? This is a simple way where you are creating the object and trying to return that. Now another thing is, you might have heard about call, apply, bind. Okay, so what we do in call, apply, bind signature is, we try to override the context of this object in our functions. So if you just see, I have a const obj1, and here I put result as 0. Okay, I have a const obj2, and here also I put result equal to 0, right? Now I have written one function, reduce add. I'm not going to use reduce function, array.reduce, but like let's say I have a let result equal to initially 0, and I'm getting some kind of argument. So I will just iterate onto it, let I is 0, I is less than argument dot I is 0, I is less than arguments dot length, okay, I plus plus. Now what we are doing inside it is result plus equal to arguments of I. So this is how we are adding all the arguments inside an array. Okay, and we can say this dot result equal to result. So what we are doing in this, when you call this reduce add function, what we are doing is we are just calculating the arguments, like you are passing some arguments here. All these are passed as arguments array. Arguments dot length will be the length of this. This will be treated as an array. This is native to JavaScript, and we are calculating the result, and we are setting this result into the global object. So here this is pointing to window object. Okay. Now how can I override? I don't want it to just set this in the window object. I wanted to set it on my own personal object. So how can I do this? I can use the call, apply, bind. So what I can do, reduce add dot call, and I will just, okay, I want to override this object with object 1. So I will set object 1. Okay, just trying to get some space, object 1, and here I'm passing all the arguments, right? So in that case, this dot result will point to the object 1, and here we are going to set the object 1 dot result on this particular line. Similarly, call, apply is also there. Apply in this, the only difference is it is going to, you can pass multiple argument in an array. Okay, so this is what we are sending. So in this, if we are setting object 2, it means you are going to set the result property of object 2 in this example. Okay, so these are the different ways of doing the invocation, and we can also talk about the hoisting of variables in JavaScript, which is also important aspect. Like here you have declared for x equal to 90, and you have created a function. Here if you are doing console.log x, and in the bottom somewhere you have declared x equal to 80, right? So what do you think x will be? According to you it should be 90? No, it's undefined. And why? because the definition of x is hoisted to the top of the function here. Now this function knows that I have x defined somewhere, but I don't have value yet, so it will just return undefined, right? So this is called hoisting of the variables. Similarly, the hoisting of functions also there. You can call the function before even defining it, because this function definition is hoisted to the top. That's why you are able to call a function even before defining that function. That is not the case with the classes. Okay, now we can just talk about async-await and promises, because these are the different mechanisms using which we are able to write the asynchronous code in JavaScript. So next thing we can talk important example is what is the difference between in operator and has on property method. So I have this object. How would I make sure that this property belongs to this object only, nothing else, right? So there is a one method which is there, object dot has on property. So x dot has on property is there, and you can actually pass the property name, which is a. So it will return true because this object has the property a. This will be the same case for b. But what happens? This is fine. But what happens about the inherited properties like object x? And I'm creating const y using object dot create. I'm passing x. So y, if you just do console.log y will not have the properties, but the proto of y is having these property a and b. So if we just try to do object dot has on property a and b, it will return as a false. Okay, that is the difference between has on property. And if you just try to do console.log, you can see a in y, it will return true because property is there but not his own. Okay, now what are the different ways of making an object? You can just simply talk about object dot using constructor function, using new function, and using object dot create. You can inherit the function from the previous function using object dot create, object dot assign, spread operator. All these possible ways you can create a simple object. Okay, sometimes we talk about AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript and XML. This is a way using which we are actually able to make API call. I mean, we are using XHR object. So XHR request we are making, and it is using an XML HTTP request. So a browser also use the same process. I mean, in browser we are using some kind of a worker internally. They are able to make a call whenever you write a fetch or whenever you are writing axios.get from client. These XSR request is getting called, and you are sending get, put, post, delete methods and making API calls. Okay, so other important things, let's talk in the next video. There we will talk more about different methods, different tips and tricks, or you can call it the tricky questions in JavaScript.